All right, and that brings us to the conversation about the Constitution turning 10 years this week. That is on the 27th of August. That should be the day after Wednesday, that is Thursday, because it was promulgated on the 27th of August 2010, so 10 years. And joining us this morning, we have Irungu Houghton, who is the Executive Director of Amnesty International. We also have Gladys Boss, who is the woman representative for Uasin Gishu, joining us, I believe, from Uasin Gishu as well. We'll be expecting George Kigoro, who is the Executive Director at KHRC, and also Bobby Mkangi, who is a former member of the Committee of Experts. They'll be helping us get into the conversation around the gains that have been made, the changes that were heralded by the Constitution. We are talking about devolution, an expanded legislature, judiciary's independence, as well as the executive and how it has been redefined, with ministers now having to come outside Parliament. And I want us to begin with the state of devolution, because we know that since 2012 up to now, up to, is it 1.7 trillion shillings have been disbursed to those counties. If we have those slides to take a look at the money that has been disbursed to the counties since 2012 until now, that the total comes to 2.27 trillion shillings. Do you have that? All right, we'll be getting that shortly. But as we begin this conversation, I want to begin with you, Honorable Boss. So, state of devolution. Devolution came into force in 2012 as the country was starting out to set the transition authority, having to ensure that different assets are moved to the devolved unit. When you look back 2.27 trillion shillings later, do you think we have lived to the aspirations of devolution? Is it serving the interests that were foreseen when the Constitution was being birthed?
I think good morning. I think in terms of, I'd rather look at it in this way. Rather than pick devolution alone, we must look at holistically how the Constitution has been implemented. And you need to look at the entire acts that are supposed to have been passed, because applying the Constitution 99% of the time is still criminal. Just that 1% is enough to give a bad score. So I would choose not to isolate just one part of the Constitution. We should be asking ourselves that when we set up the Constitutional Implementation Oversight Committee, when we set up the Constitution Implementation Commission, when we set up the Kenya Law Reform Commission, and all the other related bureaucracies, have they done a good job in applying the Constitution in the full letter, the full spirit, and ensuring that every single act and legislation that was supposed to be passed in order to implement the Constitution has been done? That would be the starting point. If you look at the 5th schedule of the Constitution, it sets up about 40 to 50 pieces of legislation that must be passed in order to implement the Constitution. But it doesn't say that is all. It says and any other laws that are required.
Right.
It put a maximum of 5 years. But when you look at even on the issue of devolution, we have not been pragmatic as a country in ensuring that we continue improving devolution. We are on the 2nd term of devolution, yet we still have challenges. Look at what happened. I think the most blatant, not only infringement of the Constitution, but an illegality was the coup, the power coup at the Nairobi County, where the functions were transferred illegally without the authority of the county assembly and the county executive, but just by getting the governor alone to sign that decision. So if you are to look at the biggest threat on devolution, that was one major threat to devolution. Because even if Nairobi County had challenges, then it should have been a situation of going back to Senate and seeing if they can pass some legislation. Because remember, the Constitution leaves room for them and say, apart from the 48 pieces of legislation, you can also pass any other legislation that implements the Constitution or required by the Constitution. So they should have looked at this as a requirement and dealt with the problems of Nairobi County legally, but not the way it was done. I've written articles about this, and I think now, if we talk about devolution, that is the first stop.
Okay, all right. Honorable Boss, I'll get back to you. Let me first of all get the comments of Irungu Houghton, because he's on the line, about the implementation of the Constitution, but specifically when you look at the devolution agenda and how it has been implemented now into the 9th year of spending, that is resources being sent to the counties, or whether to set up the structures, or whether to continue the service delivery like you have now. What is your rating about the performance of the devolution aspect of the Constitution?
I mean, I think if you asked people in the counties, was devolution a good thing, they would tell you emphatically that it is a good thing, and that they still believe in the idea of governance devolving closer to their homes and to their homesteads. But I think and you know, some of us are old enough to remember what it was like with the district focus for rural development, or power being concentrated in Nairobi and you having to travel 400 or 600 kilometers to come and get things done. So I think devolution in this sense for many people has been a good thing. I think to start off with, we need to recognize that the Katiba is a transformative document. It called for a new republic, it called for the second republic. And in many ways, what we have seen is not so much a problem with the document itself, it is the drama and the culture that has not been a match to the vision that was there. The greater concern really in some ways is that most constitutions globally, since the American Constitution was written, they last about 18 years. They are extremely fragile organisms, constitutions. So we are at our 10th year, essentially coming to the 50% life expectancy of this constitution, if you look at other so in that sense, I think it is critical that we see an focus on the constitution.
Right, and Honorable Boss, so we now have 47 county governments, 47 county assemblies, and of course very different roles of MCAs comparing to what the councillors used to do. But when you look at it, devolution was meant to devolve power and political power and resources. We have seen a bit of power devolution, we have seen a bit of resources being devolved, but when it comes to strengthening the counties to be the economic hubs of those regions that they are in, you would not say as much, because for instance, the last financial year, the counties had set out to collect up to 57 billion shillings in non-source revenue, but as of the 9th month, that is in March 2020, they had only collected about 48.5%, that is 28 billion shillings. So do you think there has been a miss in as far as strengthening the counties to become proper economic centers, and what do you think should be done in the coming years?
I think in terms of the counties, because it was something new, it's exciting, and as Irungu says, people love the fact that they have their own county government. People love the fact that they can walk up to their governor's office and say the hospital is not working, or we are having a challenge with the road or services by the county. That is a good thing in itself. But what I have seen is that Senate has not focused on helping the counties. I'll give you an example. The county assemblies are passing a lot of subsidiary legislation together with the county executive members, what they call the ministers, the counties. But Senate doesn't even oversight that or review that, so that they can make sure that there is some, it's synchronized. Because when you have a situation where you have some legislation by Nandi County Assembly, different legislation by Uasin Gishu, and different legislation by Elgeyo Marakwet, when they are actually within 42 kilometers of each other, that poses a challenge even for business people. I have seen challenges like the method of collection of revenue.
Right.
You said that they collect. I mean, many of you see when you drive on the roads, you find these revenue collection points on the roadside when you're moving from one county to another. But they collect it in cash. That is archaic. So first of all, when you say you're not collecting enough revenue, are you sure the revenue is reaching the county, the government, or is it being collected at the road? I have seen money collected in the market on market days from the women. I think they pay 40 bob in my county every day, but it's collected in cash. So it is not that they are defeated to collect revenue. Even the methodology of collecting revenue, which is something that Senate can say that we need to pass some form of legislation to put a minimum standard on the collection methodology of revenue to ensure better accountability. and we can use our revenue better.
Right, and on that point, Irungu, so now the counties are meant to be the center to spur development in those regions, but when you look at their county budgets, sometimes below 30% is the money that has been allocated for development. What do you think needs to change? Because the recurrent expenditure, if you're talking about personnel and emoluments, remains so high, the operation costs remain so high. What do you think needs to change in the next 10 years so that really the dreams and aspirations of those that drafted the Constitution for devolution come to fruition?
I mean, I think if we saw a greater sense of constitutional care or a culture of care for our Constitution, we would really be looking at whether we actually need all 47 counties. Many of them could be merged, they could be created as regional structures, but I think at this stage, that conversation is off the table. I think it's off the table because there are too many vested interests in terms of keeping the counties as they are. And therefore, we will continue to have to deal with the ballooning wage bill. We will continue to have to deal with the fact that county officers are essentially, offices are essentially employment bureaus for large numbers of people rather than centers of service provision. I think the second public finance concern really is the issue of corruption. I think Honorable Boss has spoken about this quite clearly, is that in a case where you've had almost like complete breakdown, like in Nairobi, where we've had years of corruption and graft and bad services and a disrespect for the people of Nairobi, what you have now is an administrative unit that seems disinterested in creating a civic culture that can hold them accountable, or the people that will follow, the officers that would follow them in the next election. So I think the second area is, runaway corruption. We are very concerned about what we are seeing at the national level with COVID-19 funds, but I think it probably will pale once we begin to get into the counties in terms of what's been spent. With 3 or more governors, facing corruption charges, we have a major concern in terms of how the resources are being used. And I think the last one really, which I think has been mentioned, is that, many of the counties are underfunded. I mean, overall, they are underfunded. They do not get the kind of resources that they require. But even those resources that arrive are squandered either by a culture of runaway corruption or by a need to continue servicing the payroll of staff.
Right. I wanted us to look at the numbers or the money that has been disbursed to the county since 2012 before we leave this subtopic. Do you have those numbers that we can take a look at the amount of money that was disbursed to the counties in the financial year 2012-2013? Let me just get that figure. Was about 12.6 billion shillings. Then the following year, 2013-14, they were at 210 billion shillings. 2014-15, it was at 242 billion shillings. Then 2015-2016, 276 billion shillings. You'll see the amount has been rising. 2016-17 was 298 billion shillings, the amount of money that was shared to the counties. 2017-18, 302 billion shillings. 2018-19, 304 billion shillings. 2019-20, 316.5 billion shillings. And then 2020-2021, there's a confusion there. It should be 316.5 billion shillings, giving a total of 2.27 trillion shillings. That's the amount of money that has been disbursed to the counties since the onset of devolution. And the next conversation, I want us to talk about the state of Parliament, the Legislature, because since they're coming into the new constitution, it set out how the Legislature is now aligned with 419 members. We're talking about 349 members of Parliament, 290 elected at the constituency level, 47 women elected at the county level, and 12 nominated. Then you have a speaker, the Speaker of the National Assembly. Then at the Senate, you have 47 elected senators, you have 20 nominated, and then you have the Speaker giving a total of 68. Honorable Boss, when you look at this, do you think it has really helped the gender parity? I know that still we're yet to achieve the two-third gender rule, but do you think it has helped the electability of women in political contests?
I think there has to be, the reason why the Constitution introduced the two-thirds gender principle in all elective and appointive positions was to put a substantial number of women out there that it can be enough numbers to display their competence to such an extent as that the electorate begin to trust them and understand that they are capable and get rid of the biases so that they become electable in probably another 10 years or so. But because that has failed, because the Constitution was using the two-thirds gender principle not as a permanent solution, but as an affirmative action program until such time as we are capable of doing it through proper elections or equal competition. That has been a challenge. In terms of looking at the general performance of Parliament, if you look at the ninth Parliament, they passed about 70 pieces of legislation, whereas the 10th Parliament, because of implementing the Constitution, hit a record 173. That showed that there was a concerted effort under the 10th Parliament to ensure that legislation to implement the Constitution were in fact passed. We made good progress by having, the freedom of the media, the system of the courts that was passed, the National Intelligence Service, the National Police Service, the police oversight, Independent Police Oversight Authority, and so on. All those pieces of legislation touching on that have passed. But that Parliament has not succeeded in failing to ensure that those institutions that were established to implement the Constitution are actually doing it. I tell myself, why do we have IPOA when an MCA was being beaten on live camera, clobbered by 3 police officers?
Right, and we saw those images. We saw those images at the Nairobi City County Assembly. But Irungu Houghton, as you comment about whether now the women are more electable, because in the Parliament of 2013, that was elected in 2013, there were 16 women elected at the constituency level. In 2017, 22 women were elected at the constituency level, but we lost one, so now I believe they are at 21. Do you think it has helped the electability of women? And as you respond to that, how would you rate the performance of Parliament with 349 people waiting for the Speaker's eye to make a comment on important issues of the nation?
Yeah, I think as we turn into the 10th birthday of our Constitution, we still, we have to recognize that the National Assembly and other arms of state, not just the National Assembly, remain dominated by men. As you've said, in terms of the National Assembly, we basically we have 42 MPs short of the constitutional ambition of 2/3. And under our Constitution, we had declared that no one gender should dominate any of our public offices. And that is still the case in many cases. I mean, if I can return, for example, to the issue of the cabinet. The cabinet, although it has a number of strong, capable women managing even non-traditional posts like defense, like national, like foreign affairs, we are still short of 1 woman to meet the 2/3 threshold.
Right.
In the case of the courts, the judiciary has done extremely well. Many of the judges are, again, competent and flag-bearing, kind of trailblazing women in this sense. But to be honest, we've never had a chief justice, a woman chief justice. We've never had a Qadi, despite the fact that these 2 institutions are critical for issues of family, divorce, inheritance, or the right to life. So I think in many ways we have not seen the kind of vision that we had in the Constitution translated into public offices. But let me just turn to another issue, if you will allow me, which is
allow me not to let you, so that I can introduce George Kegoro and Bobby Mukangi who are joining the conversation. And George Kegoro, the Executive Director from KHRC, I want to begin with this conversation that we are having about the state of Parliament, because now we have 418 members in Parliament, of course 68 at the Senate and 350 at the National Assembly. When you look at what the perception was putting up a National Assembly or a Parliament that would have the minority side and the majority side, not the previous situation of government versus the opposition, do you think it has really helped to have a Parliament that puts the government to account, or is the executive still finding that opportunity to control and maneuver within Parliament? George?
You can hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I think Parliament has not performed well in the last, since the onset of devolution and since the onset of the new constitution, there have been there are strong points in the Parliament, but also there are significant amounts of public pressure. For example, Parliament hasn't stood up to be counted in relation to the management of public debt, in relation to the accountability that is supposed to by a check on and balance on the executive. And there are many, many issues to do with why that has been the case. But I think the key issue for me has been the fact that the backdrop to the constitution was extremely cutthroat competition, that political competition we had during the entire period. The backdrop to the new constitution was violence, the post-election violence. We often forget that. This constitution was a response to the post-election violence. It comes in place in August 2010, but also in December the same year. We have the first going into to the Hague. So that has always been the backdrop of implementation of the Constitution. The fact that we never felt that the politics had stopped moving, that then allows people to allow the Constitution in good faith to flourish. The fact that if a Constitution that then builds accountability, that accountability includes and always threatened the people who are facing cases before the ICC. That's a major thanks to the experiences we've had, which is not put on the table and which significantly explains why all the active positions taken to undermine the Constitution.
Okay, all right, and Bobby Mkangi, I want to bring you to the conversation. First, good morning, and secondly, you are a member of the Committee of Experts as you are drafting the Constitution, but when you look at Parliament and just the recent events that you have seen at the Senate and the National Assembly of the leadership being switched by the political party leaders, and then also some level of what you may call intimidation of people being told that if you do not toe the party line, then you're going to whip you. What do you think needs to be done to ensure that Parliament, yes, continue to observe the political party guidelines, but at the same time have that autonomy and the independence that they require to really oversight on the executive?
Well, we must begin with the first point of why Kenyans wanted a changed Parliament. Because previously we had a unicameral of one house, the National Assembly, but now we have the National Assembly and the Senate. And for that matter, Kenyans wanted a better representation. Kenyans wanted to hear their voices, to hear their issues debated and taken care of through their representatives in Parliament. And that's why eventually, despite a lot of debate, they did endorse on August 4th, 2010, what we have today. That this is the structure, these are the number of representatives who should be able to deliver what Kenyans want, including affirmative action provisions. But I think so far, and you pointed it out, in the independence of this institution, even with the facilities and concepts embedded in the Constitution, like separation of powers, ensuring that Parliament itself performs within that principle, where you have even the Parliamentary Service Commission to ensure that the terms of service of parliamentarians are well protected and engineered within its own structure. When you have privileges and immunities for members of Parliament, and when you have the parliamentarians themselves receiving authority to be who they are from wananchi themselves, as per the Constitution, to have that authority bequeathed unto them, gives them ample independence to be able to perform their roles. The problem has been the way we run our politics. Chronism, the patronage nature, ethno-regional politics, which also attend to how our political parties, which are the main avenues of getting into Parliament, are. Our political parties are pseudo-political parties that, to a large extent, lack ideology that goes beyond identity. And because of this nature, the patronage, cronyistic running of our political parties, you find that by the time parliamentarians end up in Parliament, they are already emasculated. Their voice is already emasculated. Instead of them going to Parliament to hold forth the interests of wananchi, their first priority is the political party and the owners of the political parties. And that's why we have been able to see the going from in Parliament in the past previous weeks, but not only so. Ever since, we have seen parliamentarians really not be able to break the mold of being beholden by the whims of political parties, or I should call them pseudo-political parties, and the owners of those institutions. And I think that's the big problem that we have, and that's why we also, as Kenyans, need to go into the issue of looking into individual agency in terms of even the politicians that we vote for and take to parliament, because at the end of the day, we'll keep on changing these concepts and handing privileges. But if you have individuals who cannot feel that they can, or these strictures are enough for them to perform as per what wananchi want, then we are never going to bear any fruits.
And Bobby, I'll shortly get back to Honorable Boss and Irungo Houghton, but before I do so, when you look at the document, it was meant to ensure that there is gender parity, or at least 2/3, not more than 2/3 of either gender being represented, especially in public offices, but that has not been achieved, and now there's the talk of reviewing the Constitution. Do you think it's one of those areas that needs to be reviewed, and if not so, or whatever that your response may be, what do you think needs to be done to ensure that we're able to adhere to that requirement of the Constitution in all areas, but also at the legislature?
I think just implement it. In fact, that's one thing it's a big indicator of how we are falling short of what we put on paper. If we cannot be true to our word, then what else we require of ourselves? It's like saying that because we can't achieve something like what the Bible, if you are Christians, prescribes, or the Holy Quran for Muslims prescribes, and the solution is to say, then we need to go and amend the Bible or the Constitution or the Vita. No, you need to implement what is in the book first, because for Kenyans, the Constitution is...
So what's your suggestion? How do we implement? Is it by nominating more women, or is it by declaring certain areas to have women being elected? How do you do that?
I think there's not been a shortness of proposals on how this could be done. And even so, we have to mention that, go back to the infamous Naivasha process, because this is where the mechanics of ensuring that gender parity, gender equality in the political space, and especially in the institution of parliament, was to be achieved. So the provision that is there that ensures that there is gender equitability within the county assemblies was there for parliament. So that is one proposal, and there have been very many other proposals that have been provided since 2013. So the shortness is not in the proposals or mechanisms of ensuring that we animate this provision. I think the shortness is in the political will, but also going back to the social cultural will, because I think the way, for me, I've interacted with this issue, even at the social level, I think we have a hole to plug in. I think we need a conversation to go on. And Sam, if you may allow me to state this, that even when we were crafting and putting provisions that would ensure there is gender parity in parliament, we had to be creative and constructive. If people recall that in the previous draft constitution, there would be articles that would directly attend to the rights of women. But we did foresee, as a committee of experts, that if we did have an article that expressly states rights of women, and we talked to many women groups at that time, parliamentarians, organizations, etc. And we thought that the best way of doing it is to hide the proverbial lamb under the bed. And so you find all the devices, all the provisions that attend to the issues, especially women, in different sections, like Section 27 on non-discrimination, those attendant provisions that deal with gender parity, Section 100 on affirmative action, because still Kenyans were not ready, and I think are still not ready.
And Bobby, let's bring in George, because now there's that conversation that is going on about the review of the Constitution. But what do you think is the best way forward? Because there's a feeling amongst Kenyans that they are overrepresented, because so many members of parliament, not all of them have an opportunity to make their contribution, whether it's at the floor of the House or even sometimes at the committees. So how should we implement the gender rule? Is it by nominating more members of parliament, or making some changes to ensure that certain constituencies left for women?
I think there are certain myths that have been that have arisen to oppose the gender equality debate that has emerged in relation to the new constitution. One of the myths has been that we are represented, and there's abundant rebuttal that to the effect that compared to other countries that have their similar population size, there is not over-representation in the country. So that is a myth that needs to be put to rest and has been put to rest, I believe, including by the writings of Ashira Maina, for example, who is a former constitutional lawyer. The second issue is to do with the argument you make that if people are not able to speak on the floor, then that is a problem. Of course, that's a problem if ultimately in an ideal situation everyone would like to speak. But it assumes that the only way of parliamentary representation is by speaking on the floor of Parliament. That is not the case. The Parliament works through several mechanisms, of course, including committees, but also the fact that people need to see their type represented in a representative capacity. That already is good enough to the extent that if you are this type of the population and you can't see your type of identity in the representation of a representative body, that is a problem. So the fact of getting many types of people in representational roles as possible is an end in and of itself, and is important enough to uphold without regard to the false argument about the size of Parliament having become too large. That would be my response.
Right, and Honorable Boss, so again, with the conversation about reviewing the Constitution that is ongoing with the expectations from the Building Bridges initiative. So there are several issues that are yet to be implemented, including that conversation about the gender role. But what do you think needs to happen? Because with the new Constitution, members of the Cabinet or the Cabinet secretaries now come from outside Parliament, some of them not politicians. There's talk that a proportion of them need to come from Parliament. Do you think that's something that needs to be looked at, and would this be the right time to review the Constitution and amend it?
The starting point is, even if you amended the Constitution today, and then you still end up not implementing the articles or disobeying the Constitution, then it is hopeless. Right now, the Constitution says that if Parliament does not enact certain pieces of legislation, then Parliament should be dissolved. And that has always been my position. On account of failure to enact the two-thirds gender rule principle legislation, Parliament should be dissolved. On account of failure to implement or ensure the implementation of the independence of the judiciary, again, Parliament should be dissolved. The other day, the President has, the Constitution, Article 166(1) says that the President shall appoint the Chief Justice and the Deputy Chief Justice and all the judges upon the recommendation of the Judicial Service Commission and subject to the approval of Parliament.
Right.
Has failed to do so. That is a blatant disregard of the Constitution. So even if we get a new Constitution, what guarantee do we have that we shall implement it? When you look at what happened with the Nairobi County also, so it has been clear. And the Attorney General, Kihara Kariuki, whom I hold with such high regard, I was very disappointed when he was commenting on it, and he said the President cannot abdicate his role as head of state by appointing judges with questionable character. But remember, those judges that they are talking about are already serving. We have the National Intelligence Service, which is also in the Constitution, a constitutional body, that is supposed to have given such reports to the Judicial Service Commission before they were even recommended for appointment. So it is a moot point to say that if we have a new Constitution, our problems will be resolved. Please follow this current Constitution, implement it to the final letter. Once you have done that, then at least we know that whatever new Constitution comes, we shall follow.
All right.
By this Parliament. And the Constitution says that if the Parliament is dissolved and the successive Parliament comes in, and does not enact the legislation, it shall be dissolved again. So the Constitution says there is no end to how many parliaments we should dissolve.
All right. It appears that you feel, Honorable Boss, I need to cut you short because it appears that you feel that it's not time to review the Constitution. But for you, Irungu Houghton, as we conclude, do you think we're at that point that we need to amend some of the provisions? And if yes, I give you the opportunity to tell us, what do you think needs to be amended?
So I think, I could listen to Honorable Shile on that, Honorable Boss on that point for at least another hour. I don't know why you're cutting her short, but I think to be very quick, let me just make 2 quick points. One is on the 2/3 issue. It is important, but I think it is also, perhaps there's too much attention to that. The fact of the matter is, 10 years after the Constitution, 10 years after our Chapter 4, 62% of Kenyans are discriminated on the basis of their gender. They do not have the same economic opportunities as the other gender. And secondly, women earn 23% less than men. And I think this is the real issue behind gender discrimination in this country. The 2/3 issue is really a question about a principle we wanted to introduce to ensure that there would be representation and that we would actually eliminate gender inequality in our economy, in our society. And that's one of the reasons we wanted women to go to Parliament and to Senate.
Right.
Or to the National Assembly and Senate. Let me come back to this issue. There are two preoccupations with regards to the BBI process. The first is the political representation of, within government. And the reason why this is so important is because our elections have become a zero-sum game, despite Article 81, which is extremely clear in terms of how we navigate the seasons that lead to politics, and that they should not be violent, they should be free and fair, and that they should essentially be representative of the country's diversity. It is not the Constitution that disrupted the Electoral Commission in 2017. It is not the Constitution that threatened the judiciary when they were going through the process of arbitration, but it is the culture of politics that did that. And I think that, unless we address the culture of politics, we are not going to see a real shift in terms of political change there. So I think that's one of the things I would push back to our political representatives. The second one is this. Is every year since the Constitution has come in, we have fought the concept of distributive power. We have fought it at the level of devolution. We have fought it at the level of the legislation or legislative. We have fought it at the level of the judiciary and its independence. The second thing that I think we have to challenge is this idea that there must be a single center of power in this country, and that power must either reside in State House, or it must reside in the national executive, or anywhere else in our national institutions. Those are the two fundamental challenges that we face.
Right, and of course this conversation will continue for the rest of the week here on Citizen TV. I wish we had more time because there's still so much to cover with the Honorable Boss, as well as Irungu Houghton, George Kegoro from KHRC, and Bobby Mkangi, who was a member of the Committee of Experts. Thank you so much for your time. We'll get another opportunity to continue this conversation about how the new Constitution has changed how things are done and whether it's time to really start thinking of amending it in the coming days. Bye for now, but we take a short break. When we return, we'll be having Sporting Monday with Tijan Swila as well as Steve Shitara. They'll be talking about what has been happening, especially what happened last night when some people became the champions of UCL. We'll be back in a moment.